Loud now. Hello and welcome to the 8th in our 16-week series of audio-enabled EDA STEP workshop sessions. We're delighted you're here. My name is Annette and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. Before we get started, a few caveats. This session of the EDA workshop is being recorded. We hope to make audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audios will not be available on the EDA website until we've gone through the full vetting process. We will, however, be sending information about the recordings to the General Service Board distribution list. If you're not currently on the GSB contact list, please drop a line to info@eatingdisordersanonymous.org and we'll get you added. A reminder, listening to a recording is not a substitute for attending EDA meetings or working the steps. We encourage you to check out our meetings pages, which include face-to-face, online, and teleconference meetings. Just like what you might find in an EDA group, what you're about to hear reflects experiences and opinions of individual EDA members that may not tally with your own. Please take what you can use and leave the rest. You do not need a sponsor to attend this workshop. We will all be working the steps of EDA together, myself included. To make things easier for everyone, we have muted everyone as they join. If you would like to be heard, please unmute your phone by using *6 or Alt-A if you're using a computer. You can unmute and mute using the same key combination. So *6 on your phone, Alt-A on your computer. Because there are so many of us, we won't all get a chance to introduce ourselves. However, if you're speaking, please do tell us your first name and where you're from. Last week, we reviewed homework from the prior week, and Michelle helpfully discussed the fear inventory of Step 4. We'll review those concepts again tonight in brief. Last week, we were so happy to have a panel of sponsors addressing questions, and tonight we'll follow a similar format. We'll cover the remaining sections of EDA's 4-step inventory: self-pity, shame, guilt, harms done, confusion, frustration, and despair. Sounds like an entertaining event. After that, we'll hear from some of EDA's sponsors addressing questions that sponsees often ask. Right now, I'd like to ask if there's anyone on the call who sponsors others to please identify yourself so we may call on you during the question and answer panel session. Now, this doesn't imply that you're currently accepting new sponsees. However, if you are, that would also be great to know. Please let us know your first name and city. We'll start with me in the room. My name's Annette. I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder and a sponsor.
My name's Kale and I'm in recovery from an eating disorder and I'm in Phoenix.
On the phone?
This is Leslie. I sponsor. I'm in New York and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder. It's not full recovery, but it's full recovery.
All right. Well, thanks, Leslie.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm in Phoenix and I'm in recovery for an eating disorder.
Hi, Emily.
Hello, Annette. Hi, this is Michelle in Covington, Louisiana, and I am gratefully in full recovery from an eating disorder, and I sponsor.
Hi, Michelle. All right, we're going to kick it off with that. If you do sponsor and you'd like to announce that later, that's also fine. Tonight, we're going to go through discuss our inventory homework from last week, which was to complete the Step 4 brainstorming and pages 12 and 13. We're then also going to be reviewing the EDA Big Book pages 137 to 140, 146 to 140, I think it says 148. I should have this handy here right now, 154 to 158, and then Appendix B, which includes pages 532 to 543, and workshop worksheets, pages 14 to 22. Holy cow, that was a lot of reading. So we're going to discuss self-pity, sexual conduct, shame, as well as guilt, harms done, confusion, frustration, and despair. We'll do the panel Q&A and review assignments for next week. So one of the things that came up in just kind of reviewing our Step 4 inventory in general, we talked about brainstorming fears, and we looked at, again, on page 12 in our worksheets, it talks a little bit about like what kinds of things come up for us in talking about fear. one of the key things is that we really need to deal with our fear of either recovering from or not recovering from our eating disorders, because that inevitably shows up. We have our eating disorders in part to address things like specific fears, things we're going to lose or won't get, but also pervasive anxiety. Anybody have that? Why, I sure do. Anyway, so the AA text suggests that we were afraid because self-reliance failed us. And that's a kind of a key thing. Well, it's like we can't really trust ourselves to fix the same thing that we're experiencing, right? So that's kind of where it gets difficult with any 12-step program. And that's why it's so important to work on something, building a relationship with something greater than ourselves. So the AA text also suggests that we use the fear prayer. How many of you are familiar with the fear prayer? We've got people in the room raising their hands. So yes, many of us are. So can anybody repeat the fear prayer for us? What are we supposed to do when we're confronted with fears? Well, we ask God.
I think I can.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. I think it's we ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be.
You bet. And you know, there's many reasons why it's important to just kind of get out of ourselves. I mean, we have our fear because of self-focused, you know, worries about loss or worries about, you know, our insufficiency or, you know, we're not enough. So that same kind of stuff, it gets in the way of our connection to other people, to something greater than ourselves. And we aren't going to get past it unless we're able to turn our will and our lives over to this thing that's greater than ourselves. And what step was that? That was way back in step 3. And you know what? I thought I could get through this step 4, you know, just by kind of going through the motions. You know, they say bring the body and the mind will follow. And I figured, well, if I'm doing the writing, that's bringing the body, right? But if you're struggling with this part, I would encourage you, you know, it's like there's no shame or fear don't hesitate to go back to some of these earlier steps, like step 2. I mean, I kept getting hung up on came to believe. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like belief. That's a really tough subject. So if you're really struggling with that, don't be alarmed. You're right where everybody else is for typically a pretty long time. Don't allow yourself to be dissuaded. This is really, it's a process. And some of it is just in engaging and recognizing what our fears really are. So among the things that we are often concerned about are control of our impulses. We're afraid of our bodies. Some of us are afraid of the intimacy of sex. We're going to talk about sex tonight. Others were frightened at the intensity and impropriety of our sexual urges. Awkwardly, some of us were all the above. And it's with food the same as with sex. You know, physical exercise was another thing that we feared either engaging in more of or less of, or both. So there's a lot of really complex things in fear. So I wanted to check in with folks. You know, were people able to get through the fear inventory? All right, I'm looking at people in the room. Partly, yeah. It's a tall order. You know what? This is not going to be the last time probably any of us goes through. If we're in the 12-step group or program, we're probably going to be doing a lot of these things more than once. So again, this is an effort to understand and to incorporate these processes and how we think. It's not necessarily like it's got to be done just so or done to a certain level of completion. The idea is going through this exercise. So one thing that you see on the screen here, is being scared of recovery. One of the things that I had a really tough time kind of getting comfortable with was just how uncomfortable this process of engaging with recovery really was. Julie, who's somebody that's my vice chair on the General Service Board, says we have to get comfortable getting, being uncomfortable. That comfortable with uncomfortable, like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. But, you know, practice makes perfect, and the more we get uncomfortable, the more comfortable we become. So if it's uncomfortable, that's terrific. Okay, moving on. Resolutions to fear. Learning to listen to and trust our bodies. Taking care of basic needs and knowing that our bodies will adjust if we over or under eat. The main thing is to get the drama out of it, get the shame out of it. Take careful risks. You're going to fail. Okay, this is the reason that EDA does not focus on abstinence, is because this is an experience fraught with difficulty and ambiguity. And it's like, how do you know when you've done it right? Well, the reality is you're going to know because it feels right, and you're not going to know what feels right until you've been doing it for a while. And then you'll be like, yeah, actually, I feel freer. And yeah, actually, I'm not as focused on like the specifics of the weight or the amount of food or the number of calories that I've just exercised off, or all that stuff. It diminishes dramatically over time if we're focused on doing the next right thing, which, trust me, is not going to be about the food. That's a distraction. So this is the key thing of the step 4, is to free us to focus on what really does matter. We eat to fuel our service to God, higher power, higher purpose, and recognize that things like intimacy and sex are a fundamental human need. So we try to think about what healthy examples we want to set for other people in our lives, whether that's our spouses, our kids, significant folks in our lives at one level or another. So resolutions to fear, here's that fear prayer. We ask God to return to our higher power or higher purpose for help in keeping our thoughts on what we can do to be of useful service. We use our fear to motivate changes. And if you've gotten through that resolutions column, you may be like just depressed. It's like, I know when I go and write out my resolutions, I'm like, dang it, I should know how to do this already. I'm 56 years old, and I'm doing my 4 step going like, oh gosh, still again, and the reality is I'm not in the food. I'm not doing other behaviors to evade my problems. That's fantastic. So I'm really delighted about that. So another thing is just to recognize that fear serves a useful purpose. Fear prayer, page 223. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And that's going to come up again and again, okay? That's mentioned not only in the fear prayer, but this whole idea of resolutions, it's really not just, well, I'm going to turn it over. It's also about asking for guidance and direction to decide what the next right thing is. We ask what a person of dignity and integrity would do if they found the courage to act, despite whatever the emotion is. So it's not just fear. That's the resolution, means that's what we think that the person of dignity or integrity would do. And then it takes the rest of the steps to give us the power. So reflections for tonight. And Michelle, I'm not sure if you were just hoping to share a little bit about your experience with the remaining 6 sections. Would you be willing to speak? And this is, I'm just making this request now because the person that I thought might do it wasn't able to attend tonight. So pages 154 to 156, or if you want to just talk a little bit about your experiences addressing these additional topics. So again, AA talks about sex inventory, and EDA, it's everywhere. So go ahead, Michelle,
right.
Ready. And if not, that's okay. We'll pick on somebody else.
Okay, no, I think I caught it. So yeah, I mean, same thing. It's like, having had experience in a different, and this is Michelle, hi. So having had experience in a different fellowship, I'm used to doing a specific sex inventory. And it's true, like for me, that I like to call it the big 8, right? And EDA, it's like the big 8, the resentment and fear that we covered. And then the other guys, self-pity, shame, guilt, harm's done, confusion, frustration, despair. So much of my sex conduct do appear in those 8 areas. And the book, has a little blurb on exploring sex conduct here. And I'm not sure, can y'all hear me okay? Because I'm on earphones. I just want to make sure that there's not a problem with the audio.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I'm sorry. So again, it's just a matter of there's a part in the book that kind of gets me thinking about this. So in my case, I, had some of my issues with sex conduct were, when I was younger, and, I'm 50. I just turned 50 years old. And, so, I mean, I've been in a stable relationship, married for a very long time. And, I don't really have a lot of the same issues that I had before. I'm very blessed in my relationship. And so some of these things, though, like to think about it in terms of, it's not how am I manipulative? Like, what have I done that way? You know what I mean? So in doing this, it helped kind of jog my memory in terms of areas where I felt shame or guilt, to kind of bring it to mind that it was something that was more real and not just something that it was kind of like, oh yeah, in the past did that. And so I wanted to be able to, having to look at the section in the book helped me do a good brainstorming list when I was looking at shame, guilt, confusion, frustration. And so I really do appreciate that. And moving towards, a sound ideal for a future sex life. And again, use intimacy in an authentic, meaningful way, which is a constructive thing in a relationship. And, the idea of peace and dignity with that as well. So to me, it's like it did transcend, and it was important for me to focus on that section in the book because I wanted to have a broader view when I was considering the shame, guilt, frustration, and the other ones, because I've been in a stable, relationship that's been very healthy. So I didn't want to necessarily be able to dismiss it. You know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to say. And reading through that book and kind of taking that stuff to heart helped me, I think about ways where maybe I've been manipulative or whatever. So anyway, the other areas that I had looked through were regarding self-pity, shame, guilt, harms done is associated with guilt, confusion, frustration, despair. And, I kind of like to take a little step back before I move forward. And one of the paragraphs that I really liked in the book was continuing the work on things that affect my ability to work for what really matters, and problems that stand in the way of service have to be solved or put aside. And that's kind of like, to me, the big umbrella over, working on these big 8, right? So again, it's like some of these things, it's easy for me to say, oh, self-pity, that really has to do with me, or it's not the same as resentment and fear, or maybe I don't have this or whatever. But the truth is, it's like in some little way, these pieces have affected my life. And just by brainstorming and taking a look at the different areas, it kind of gets me really thinking about, when I'm stuck in traffic, where my mind goes, you know what I mean? Like that's often when I'm thinking about the coworker at work who, did something, or, I had this guy in the gym who I nicknamed Bandana Man, who like would just set my blood aboil. And same with self-pity, shame, guilt. And so like, just to go through these really quick, and it is covered in beautiful detail in the book, and very quickly, in terms of self-pity, reasons we felt sorry for ourselves, sometimes connected with resentment, sometimes not. I was teased in grammar school. I was shunned. So that kind of went into my self-pity. Shame, anything for which we felt ashamed, and stuff that I was not responsible for, like bullied or abused, childhood poverty, personality. So I have, in my mind, very strange appearance. And so that was on my shame thing. Also, the shun thing, different aspects was reflected in shame that was from what I had come up with for self-pity. Guilt or harms done. I pretty much was by myself. I was an island, and I didn't really see how could I didn't really do horrible things to people, But when I started really thinking about it and looking at the book where it talks about, lies and cheating and stealing and stuff like that, that's something. But, again, the manipulation, what is the emotional damage? How about, omission, just not showing up for people, wasting money. I mean, I have a joint bank account with my husband, wasting money, lying, even by just not telling the truth. And that impacts intimacy, the forming of a true intimate relationship, choosing poorly, like not showing up for family members. And, I love the whole resolutions about, what could I have done instead? And that kind of just sets the stage for me to like think about what other options are next time some of these emotions come up, or situations that if I can identify, oh, this is what's going on, I kind of have like a plan B in the back of my brain. And to touch upon like confusion or doubt, situations where we felt abandoned or bewildered. And so, for me, it's like I went through a period of reaching out for help as a kid and as an adult. And, I was not responded to, especially as a little kid. Like asking for help was something that was really kind of a big deal. And that left me, that's the kind of, but that came up with my confusion, where I felt abandoned. Like I'm asking for help as a kid and the people who were supposed to give me help didn't. And there's a whole, backstory there and everything like that. But like, that was one of the areas where for me, it was like confusion. And then as an adult, I can still have, similar situations like that, whether it's at work and I report a behavior that doesn't really get the traction it should or something like that. Frustration, things that make me angry, even if I don't have resentment. And that can be, it also says in the book, somewhat, self-directed. So my big frustration is, I don't know if anybody can identify with this, others not being considerate of my needs. Everything really should just revolve around me and the world would be just such a wonderful place. I'm just kidding. But, really, like, that's my frustration. It's like when the cashier is not ringing up the stuff as fast, because I have somewhere I need to be in 10 minutes. Doesn't she know? Or, or the person who runs really fast to get in front of me in line with 26 items in her basket and it's a 10-item limit line. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And I have this big thing in my mind about considerate without really realizing all the ways in my life that I'm not considerate, right? And so that was a really useful exercise for me. And then despair, reasons for hopelessness, past and present. And what is just like so freaking awesome to me? So I actually had to pull up my original 4-step for despair. Because you know what? I'm not despairing over anything right now. And that's really a miracle. So that to me is pretty damn good. Oh, sorry, I cursed. I guess I shouldn't have done that. But let's see what I have for despair, if I can pull it up real quickly as an example. And there are so many good examples in the back of the book too. One of my despairs, and this is in the book for sure, my eating disorder. And the reason cause, I used to feel like there was no way out of my behaviors. It affected every aspect of my life, self-esteem, ambition, security, etc. And, my big thing was that believing the lie that I was hopeless, and I used that as an excuse to keep doing what I was doing, even though I knew others had the miracle of recovery, and even though there were times where I could stay stopped for a time, I used hopelessness as just an excuse to make a big deal of stuff rather than keeping it right-sized. And my resolution for that is just remembering that there are not many extremes. Life is not black and white. To keep working on my recovery, and if I start feeling like I don't honor balance, to readjust rather than go off the deep end. And I'm feeling hopeless, to make a gratitude list. I have a bunch of tools for that right now. So anyway, so that was just got like a little bit of an example of kind of what I did with some of these sections. And I am just so incredibly grateful that, it is the big 8 rather than the 3, because I really needed to take a look at some of this stuff. And I know that people talk a lot about, the hard work and stuff, but it was just such a blessing. I feel like I got some really good tools in my toolbox after going through these exercises, and ways that have really helped me look to new ways to respond to life and, to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And one of the things that I love that Julie put on the board at that workshop in Chicago was the question isn't whether I'm going to survive outside of my comfort zone, but whether I will survive inside of it. And looking at this stuff is just a first step into being willing to experience life on life's terms and not in the prison of my eating disorder. And that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Michelle. Really appreciate that input. So I'm going to also ask Cale to share a little bit about his experiences with these different topics. And if you have reflections from the book, that's great. If not, just go for it. So take it away.
Thanks, Annette. And thank you, Michelle, for sharing your perspective on all of the different categories. I related to so much of what you shared. And I also agree that I really appreciated the additional areas in which we were encouraged to reflect on the book compared to the AA Big Book. I don't know, I think, going back through my fourth step, one of the big areas that I found that stood out to me is, taking a look at just I don't know, sort of how paralyzed I felt. I know we already talked, last weekend already a little bit about fear. But one thing that stuck out to me is that, two of my top fears were failure, and then another one was success.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be in the middle. It was just I didn't want to stand out. And I certainly didn't want to, fail and be, homeless and, poor and not being able to make ends meet and that sort of thing. And, just the incredible amount of anxiety that seemed to linger at all times. I didn't want to, be too much of anything. And then, so to break that out even further, I think, it was helpful to take a look at some of the things that I was ashamed of. For example, one of the things I guess I looked into is my upbringing. There was a time when my family was on the verge of homelessness and and today still struggles to make ends meet a lot of times. And I've always told myself that I wouldn't allow that to help. I wouldn't allow that to happen to me as an adult. And so, that goes into my fear of failure, but also just the shame and the self-pity as well, kind of thinking about I think it talks a little bit about the demographics or socioeconomic child poverty. There it is. Childhood poverty.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's, I really appreciated that. It really was a great guide for me to be able to dig a little bit deeper. Because one of the challenges I think that I had, I remember going into my fourth step is I really built it up to be this big thing, before I got to step 4. And I remember that resentment was the big word that stuck out to me. And I just remember, Michelle, you mentioned, what do you think about when you're just stuck in traffic? And I remember being stuck. I was what am I ever going to write about when it comes to resentment? Because I don't get mad. I actually spoke to my therapist today. He was do you ever, I was I've been feeling really resentful lately. And he's I'm really glad that you're resentful, because a time ago, I didn't. I was afraid to think of resentments because I have always suppressed anger because I think it's not becoming, I'm supposed to swallow that. So for me, it really was helpful to examine other things, because if I was just looking at resentments, I would have been stuck. So I think by examining other things my shame and self-pity and fears, helped me to identify the areas in which that I needed to focus on. And one thing that I did, I think, a little bit differently is when I was doing my sex and relationship inventory. I'm not sure why it was guided to me this way, but my sponsor suggested that I write a list of the qualities that I would like to see in myself in a relationship, whether intimate or not. And I realized that I have not always had the best track record when in relationships nor sexual partners, but when I think about the qualities I want to see in myself, I think that was a really important list for me to brainstorm, because it kind of helped me to switch perspectives a little bit, and kind of instead of examining all of the areas in which I had fallen short in the past, it was a way for me to kind of look forward to how I would do things differently. Like this part of my examination was kind of like basically a resolution. So like my whole inventory for this portion was kind of a resolution. But so, talking about things about making sure I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, attending mass and EDA meetings and therapy, and committing myself to this. And, yeah, that really helped me to kind of switch my perspective into a kind of more positive thinking, because I think this fourth step can be seen as sort of a negative thinking of all of the areas in which we have fallen short, but that's one thing I did differently, I think. So
Cool.
that's it. With that, I pass.
Thank you so much, Kale. And I could relate to so much of what you said, because it's like, yeah, it was not okay to be angry in my family either. It's like, no, you just couldn't. And so, and especially as an adult, it's like, no, you can't be angry at your children. You're the adult, dang it. And I had shame about my kids. It's like they didn't behave perfectly, It's like, my gosh, how dare they? Don't they realize what shame they're bringing to me and to the family? It's like, no, oh gosh, no, and I knew that was wrong thinking, such wrong thinking. And, sex, oh gosh, it's like, I'd get the heebie-jeebies. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. You can't, again, it's like, if you're not taking care of your basics, you're basically like a 3-year-old. Who wants to be a 3-year-old in the bedroom? I mean, let's hope not. I mean, that's terrible, right? But there's so many things, ways in which we need to grow, and we have to really face what we're afraid of. That part has been tough. It's like, honestly, when you're looking at, I loved what you said, Kale, about focusing on what you want. And that's really what the beauty, I think, of the EDA fourth step is, because that resolution column is all about what you want. It's like, who do I want to be in the context of this situation? Because it's always kind of a specific, if we're really general about our fears or really general about our self-pity, we're not going to come up with solid resolutions. It's like, I have to really look at, okay, so like, today I said something in a meeting where it was like, I said, I want you to, and I have to go think, it's like, okay, so I got feedback on that, but that was not really okay. And, did I have a resentment? No, I didn't have a resentment, but I felt shame. Okay, so how am I going to deal with that shame of being told like, oh, I did something bad? Well, I can accept the feedback and I can think of how I would have done it differently. Exactly what we do in the fourth step. And so do I feel like happy and empowered? Yes, because I was gracious at accepting the feedback. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And here's what I should have said. And so when I did that and was able to restate what I really meant, they were like, yeah, okay, that's great. And you're doing it, and then I got positive feedback. So it was like immediate. It was really wonderful. So anyway, I know that Leslie, you had a few things that you wanted to share also. Are you prepared to go?
Yes.
Oh,
Hi.
please do. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Annette, and I really appreciate everything that has already been shared. And I just appreciate people really being honest about what their experience is with the fourth step and just with all of these emotions, because, it's very, it's vulnerable. And the thing that I wanted to share on was about despair. And similar to what Michelle said, the despair that I felt while I was in behaviors in my eating disorder, where it just felt like it was never going to be, like, where I would just feel so helpless and out of control. It was like the pit of despair. And once I got into recovery, I think that part of what happened is that I had to start to take a look at what the eating disorder was covering up. What I came to see was that those behaviors were covering up a despair that was already there. Like, it was easier to feel, not easier, but just that what came through because of working the fourth step, and all the work that I've been doing, is to see that underneath that despair around the eating disorder was a despair just about the basis of who I was as a person. and a feeling of just a basic self-worth thing. And I think this is similar to something that Kale said around just how.
Leslie, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you not
Yeah,
hear me?
now it's better. Yeah,
Okay.
now we can.
Sorry, thank you. So with the fourth step, the column, the fourth column is such an amazing column. I talked about this the last time, but just to really dive into when I'm resentful of other people, places, and things, there is a way that I'm projecting onto them what was really about me and my feeling of lack of self-worth. For example, my someone who was like a mother-in-law to me, I was really I felt like she was judgmental of me, and actually I was being judgmental of her, and that I couldn't handle the intimacy of that relationship. And so that fundamental despair is something that I work with now. And I loved hearing that Michelle was like, I don't feel that now. I'm like, yay. And I said earlier that I'm still I'm not fully recovered. I am mostly recovered. I've said that body image is the last piece, but there's also this piece of like working with this basic feeling of self-worth that is just something that I do with my higher power every day. And that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And I know Emily is also prepared to speak to despair. Emily, are you ready to go?
Sure. I have a couple of things. Now, I have done the fourth step with the 3 sections. This is my first time going through it with all 8 sections. I think someone said the big 8 or something. But I've done some brainstorming. So I have some, my history involves a lot of like loss and death. So a lot of the things that I feel hopeless about, past and present, revolve around that. So it's really vulnerable stuff. But I also feel like that's why I think the breadth of these categories is so important, because for me, this is like some really heavy stuff that has to be addressed and looked at. And if I just go with my resentments, I might be able to skim by it, and not put it in any of the sections. But this got it really nicely. So I don't have too much to say on despair, because I don't think I carried my examples through yet, but I think I did for self-pity.
Go for it.
Okay, cool. So I had an example for self-pity where, like, it's hard to find a good job, hard to find like whatever a good job is to me. And I said it affects my ambition. And then my part is like not trying as much as I could to seek out other options outside my comfort zone, being picky, focusing on other things, having my attention focused on other things. And then I haven't gotten to the resolution part yet, but hopefully that's a reasonable example of what it looks like to sort of mentally take yourself through having a feeling and not exactly knowing what to do with it. And I think the whole point is that the way I look at the fourth step is that it's about energy. It's about how much energy am I using up holding on to all these things. And by putting them down on paper and sharing them with another person, for me, a lot of them were released. And so I don't have to carry it around anymore. And I'm allowed to use that energy in a much more efficient way. So I think that's all I have. Yeah. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you very much, Emily. Really appreciate that. One of the things I wanted to point out is just that the thoroughness and fearlessness does not mean that we're really ever done. Defining resolutions isn't something that we pick a resolution and then bam, there it is, or that we won't change our minds about what the resolution entails. So for me, it's like, I've been doing these steps now for a long time. And honestly, the same relationships keep coming up. Do they come up the same way? No, not actually. It's like my mother has probably been on every single 4-step I think I've ever done. And she is a delightful human being. I adore my mother. I did not start out there, I will say that. But the nature of our relationship has changed dramatically over the course of the last 15 years or so. Actually, over the entire course of my time in recovery, the relationship has changed a lot. But I mean, still there are resentments. She doesn't listen to me. Still there are, self-pity. It's like, again, she doesn't listen to me. But when I really work through this from so many different angles, there's despair of ever really being able to kind of get to a great relationship, because we have a good relationship. It's actually a warm and loving and caring and thoughtful, considerate relationship where I really empathize and, it's great at that level, but there's still like sticking points where I judge her. There's still sticking points where, I feel, shame over my hair trigger responses when she manages to hit that button just right. And so when I think all the way through, like what my error and my parts are on all of those different ways of looking at that relationship, I see all the different things that I'm expecting of myself, expecting of my mother, expecting of the nature of that relationship. And I think, what a pile of cowpucky, because it's really what I really need to do with my mother is the same as what I need to do with my children, is the same as what I need to do with my husband, is treat them with incredible, just respect, and to treasure the incredible richness of my life with them in it, because that isn't a given. It's like I could lose anybody at any day. And so really just focusing on doing my work to take care of me and honoring and appreciating what's good and right and whole and powerfully positive about them, because everybody's got their crap. But my relationships have just done a 180. The things that I thought I thought would never get better have dramatically changed for the better. And it doesn't mean that everything's all resolved, because it's not. I still have shame over things that I'm like, that's not my issue. I still have self-pity over things that were like ages ago. And, so no, I'm never going to be a perfect person, but these steps do work. They're not magic. Like it says here, they're hard work, but we do get freedom from our eating disorders contingent on our reliance on something bigger than we are. And that we have to get perspective so that we're not all caught up in the drama. We have to, so that we have a reason to keep pushing forward, because if we're hating ourselves, because that happens, you just kind of like get down. It's like, oh gosh, I so suck. And, the reality is that our time, our talents, our energy can be useful. And the other thing is that feelings serve a purpose. Those things that I'm feeling, like frustration with, that overwhelm, that is my signal. That's my red flag waving that, nope, I actually got to look at this differently. I'm not looking at it in a way that is reasonable or rational under the circumstances. Those emotions that I thought were like I wanted to run a million miles away from, those are the tickets to freedom and peace. Because if I deal with the underlying cause, guess what? I'll be more effective and better at everything I do. I've done enough talking, but I really like some of the examples in the back of the book. So, starting with page 532, there's some really nice resolutions. If you're struggling trying to find an adequate resolution for something, check out the stuff in the back of the book. A lot of kind of the basic things, especially when it comes to like gaining weight, losing relationships, feeling terrible about the way you deal with particular situations. I think there's a lot of good stuff back there. All right, so we're actually going to move now to a panel. And so we had a bunch of questions that people typically ask. Sponsees often ask these questions in my experience. And we have an opportunity also for others potentially to ask questions. So if you've had a question as you've been working through these 4 steps, I'm going to try and pull up the chat window. Wish me luck with this, because I don't know if I can do it. There's the chat window. Okay. So nobody has typed into the chat window yet, But if you want to do that, we'll try to pay attention and answer those questions as well. But we're now going to turn to the questions that people typically have, and I'm just going to read them, and we'll ask our sponsors to address them. So here are the questions that we've put out there. And I'm going to have to move this little window over to the side so I can read it. It says, all my emotions seem to run together. I'm overwhelmed. Whoa, hang on. I think I just maximized my chat window. That's not what I intended to do. All my emotions seem to run together. I'm overwhelmed when I try to pull things apart. Where do I start? Anybody want to pick that one?
I can maybe speak to that. This is Emily.
Go ahead, Emily.
All right, so I definitely felt completely overwhelmed, and also as a person who struggled anyway to identify my emotions, to then have to, like the question says, pull them apart and identify them so clearly as to be on a written inventory seemed like so ironic, because I was just not that person. But I know my sponsor at the time, she limited me. She actually had some really healthy boundaries for me in doing my inventory. Like when it came to identifying what was at risk, she would say, you may put like 2 to 3 max, but you are not allowed to put all of them. So that's what I had done on my first 4th step. I had just put, there was a lot of narrative. There was a lot of, and I guess that's what I had to do to get through it. But another really good tip was to try and stay as objective as possible, and try and stay with the facts and not get into like opinion, or if I had someone call it like therapy once, it's looking like therapy on the paper, which I kind of related to. So I don't know if that helps at all or makes any sense. I hear some weird feedback. It's weird.
It made
Sorry.
sense. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Leslie in New York.
Go ahead, Leslie.
And yeah, what I would say there is where to start is just start with the first one and let go of perfectionism. Like that's something that comes up for me, is just to, feeling like I have to do it perfectly and that it has to be really clear. No, it doesn't. Just start where I am, start where you are, and just do it badly.
I love that. Yeah, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Yeah. So I had the same thing. This is Annette, and I couldn't tell what was one thing or the other. I was so inexperienced at dealing with my emotions. It was just one black mess, and I just I had an eating disorder because I frankly never wanted to deal with whatever the heck it was. It was wrong. Emotions were just wrong. Okay, so trying to pull apart what was this sort of pain versus that, or that sort of black anger versus this other thing, it was frustrating. So frustration was one of the very first things that I experienced, was just like, hell no, I have no idea what this is, and I don't like being forced to do this because it felt wrong. And then I was like, well, but it's all the same kind of. It's like, okay, you can list however many different things, and I feel the same way about absolutely every single one of them, which is miserable. So like Leslie said, it's just get started, just do it, and know that it's never wrong. That's the other thing. It's like, yeah, you can have all those emotions, and they can occur contiguously. I mean, they can occur concurrently. So it's not like it's inaccurate. It actually might be exactly accurate. You just have every possible emotion in varying degrees on the spectrum. So you just start writing, and whatever comes out, make it fit into the box. And when it's done, when you're done with the box, you're done. All right. Anybody else on that? Okay, next. Honestly, it wasn't that bad. I didn't steal or hurt anybody intentionally. I'm not jealous or mean. What kinds of things should go on my guilt inventory? Who wants to answer that one? Actually, I thought Michelle did a really nice job with that. Stealing time, yeah. So it's like when I stole time away from my family and I stole my emotional honesty and authenticity from my family, that was probably the worst thing I had ever done. I wasn't really me. I didn't give them honest feedback. I didn't really love them. I couldn't because I wasn't allowing myself to feel.
Thanks, Annette. This is Leslie again in New York. The thought that a sponsor said to me once was anything that has any residue. And I found that really helpful. It's like, it doesn't have to be like murdering someone or whatever. It's just anything that sticks in my craw, like that sticks in, you know, that when I think of it, I have a little, that's what goes on that list.
Yeah, like abandonment. How many people do you no longer call on the phone? I feel that all it makes, I feel so guilty because there's people that I know I should call and I just, oh, yeah. Anyway, anybody else? What else? Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
have a comment to answer this question. There's so many things that I have done wrong by omission, and that's where the real digging takes place. Where have I been prideful in my mind and my body language was wrong? Where have I been arrogant? Where have I ignored? Where have I not dealt with somebody properly? On and on. I mean, that list can be really, really long. What would have been better? Not to create guilt, but to pull that stuff out so that it can be looked at with the shiny, bright light of day. Pull it out, look at it, you know, resolve it, and move on. Yes.
Fantastic. That's great. So we're going to move to the next question. Can someone please explain what I'm supposed to do when I just can't bear to think of something I did? So one example of that is, you know, if somebody has ever, you know, been beaten a child, anybody ever, you know, molested somebody, you know, those are things that you're just like, you know, I've worked with sponsees that have done both of those things, and it's very difficult and painful to deal with. So what anybody else have guidance on how to address those situations? Oh, come on. Can't always just be me.
It's Leslie in New York again.
Thank you, Leslie.
Sure. So what I would say is that we are here to set ourselves free. Like that's what the steps are for, like to be happy, joyous, and free. My higher power wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. And these are the things that when we work step 5, and then step 6, 7, 8, 9, that we can finally be free of. Like, because let's not pretend that we're not carrying around the guilt of those things. Like that's, I mean, not, you know, everybody hasn't had awful things, but if there's something that does have, you know, that feels really, really heavy, this is a place to lighten the load. And it doesn't mean that those things weren't awful, but this is where we can get to feel that forgiveness for ourselves and from our higher power. So the worse the thing, the better one can feel by relieving, by just letting it out.
Hi, this is Michelle. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead, Michelle.
So yeah, I have had trouble with this too. And you know, part of, and I really have appreciated what, you know, Leslie has said, for sure. Part of it for me though too is to realize, or not really realize, I'm not really sent off into the corner to do this by myself, right? To have somebody there walking through this with me, right? Not only do I have a strength of a higher power, but my sponsor. So when sometimes this stuff is really hard, I just try to lean on somebody a little bit when I'm writing this stuff. You know, I also, you know, and have used things like write about it for a limited period of time set it up beforehand that I'm going to let myself experience the sorrow for 10 minutes, you know, and then I can pick it up again the next day or whatever, you know. That's what I like to do. That's my disease right there for you. But the main thing for me too is, once I started doing a couple of them and took that leap of faith, I started realizing that there was nothing in the past that I could change. Some of the things that I've done were irreparable. Not much in life is irreparable, but some of the things were irreparable. But there's always a way to reframe and get some perspective, right? Sometimes mistakes in the past inform the future, right? So that I can make different choices going forward. And some of the relief that I've gotten from doing the writing and the freedom that Leslie talked about adds another layer of perspective, because with some of the things that I've done, or some of the things even like to talk about other categories that have happened to me, that I thought that I was the only person out there, I happen to find people who've done similar things or who've experienced similar things. And there's just so much power in the freedom of letting, or it's a moment of grace, or a moment of connection with a higher power, where you can share something with somebody and instantly you know that they feel like they're not so alone, you know. And that's kind of the magic that I've experienced walking through the 4-step with a sponsor, help, you know, saying, look, I'm really having trouble writing on this right now. Another tool has been, you know, setting aside a time period for the writing, and then like having plans with a friend afterwards, you know, something that gives me joy afterwards. So it's not just me wallowing in you know, giving myself like a so anyway, that's just some of my experience on that one.
Thank you, Michelle. And I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to comment that all of our worst experiences have some power that they can, some light that they can shed on the rest of our lives. There's things that I've done that I will never ever do again, but I have tremendous empathy for people that are going through similar circumstances or through that same kind of anguish. The anguish that I have over some of the things that I've said or done, honestly, it doesn't diminish it for me to admit it, and it isn't wallowing in it. This 4-step is not about wallowing. It's about accounting. It's being that objectivity and figuring out, how can I make this horrible thing into something useful to others? Not to me. It's like, I'm not the beneficiary here. This is more about, how can I use this thing that has been a burden to lighten someone else's load. So, okay, the last question was, I'm having a hard time understanding what to do with my shame. Okay, what do you tell your sponsees who are stuck on resolutions when they're just miserable? Anybody?
This is Cal. I think I can answer that.
Yay.
So I think it was, I brought it up, Michelle and Annette's comments that really stuck out to me. And but I remember going through my 5th step, and you know, there were a lot of things that, you know, that I had written about in my 4th step, or that were part of my story, that I really was not super stoked about talking about. You know, things that I had like done in my childhood years, you know, just silly, like embarrassing things that I just like was so shameful about. And to be able to share that with another person, and to have them say that they have done, you know, perhaps it wasn't the same thing, but it was like, oh my gosh, I've done something that was also shameful, that I'm like really embarrassed about. And then we laughed about it. And there was, you know, a lot of relief in that. And I mean, I think that it's really like vulnerability is a big part of this program, and you know, kind of I mean, it's kind of leading into step 5, but allowing yourself to be vulnerable with another person, you know, relieves us of the pain of isolation, which I think that shame puts us in. You know, when we're shameful, I think, you know, in my experience, when I'm ashamed of something, I isolate. I don't talk about it. It's my secret, and it dwells within me, and then it becomes huge.
It's like cancer.
Yeah, and then but just speaking it, you know, being vulnerable and brave, and speaking it to another person will really right-size it. You know, put it into perspective, and perhaps can even be something that you can laugh about with another person.
Thank you, Ken. And another thing is that, you know, shame protects what? Shame protects my pride. So, you know, I do actually talk to my sponsees that are, because you know what, it's like we all need to have self-esteem, and that's really different from pride. You know, pride's the thing that separates us from others, and pride's what makes us draw into the shell. So busting out of it requires that reaching out and reliance on others. It's hard when we're miserable. All right, I know we're out of time, and okay, so we're going to cover real briefly. I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys did such an amazing job. I'm really like stoked. So looking forward to more very soon. So I'm going to come back over here, and hopefully this will go to the next slide. Yes, let's see. Yes, yay. Okay, so assignments for next week. We're going to wrap up our 4th step this week. So if you haven't yet done so, please complete your 4th step. For next week, we're going to read the EDA Big Book, pages 149 to 156 and pages 532 to 543. This is so much easier. It really is. But brainstorm, so this is brainstorming, completing the columns, because if you haven't done these yet, because we were just reading them last week, I'm sorry, I forgot. So reading last week, this week we're actually going to do the self-pity, shame, guilt, confusion, frustration, and despair. Those are pages 14 to 22 in your worksheets. And please do focus on what you should have thought and did instead, and what you would want to do in the future if a situation comes up again. So that 5th column is actually the one where I find the most peace, even if I know that it's not attainable for me necessarily right in the moment. So we think about what we would want to do, and then what we could do today that moves us just a little bit in that direction. We consider using the fear prayer for all the topics, okay, because it's not just limited to fear. And anyway, I really am looking forward to people sharing next week a little bit more about how they got through this, because this is really the sharing part, is where the walls do break down and we become this unity in a singleness of purpose to carry the message, and it just feels fantastic. So all right, looking forward to next week. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and it's time to wrap. We do have a 7th tradition. If you are a member of EDA and would like to contribute to supporting this effort, you can write us at a post office box, which is on the website. You can also click the PayPal link and suffer through the misery of that. And so right now, I guess we're going to wrap with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. Okay, on the count of, please unmute. It's *6 to unmute, or Alt-A on a computer, and we're going to start on 3. 1, 2, 3. God,
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change,
courage to change,
courage to change the things I can,
wisdom,
and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes. Yeah, that. It works if you work it, and you're worth it. Woo! Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not going to shut the meeting down, but I'm going to stop recording now. Or not. Oh, you're gonna love it. Thank you.
Yes.
You know what?
I know.